Hello and welcome to a new interview from MinnMax. I'm Ben Hansen, and MinnMax is a Patreon about games, friends, and getting better. Today's interview is with not anybody from Giant Bomb, sorry to disappoint you all, but we have Stephen Totilo, who ran Kotaku for many years. He started back at Kotaku in 2008, and he's been working in the news field and the game industry for many, many, many years. So he's seen a lot, he's evolved a lot, and so in this interview, we talk about his new push for gaming coverage at Axios. He started a newsletter over there at Axios, so we talk about that. We talk about the big news story of the week, Epic versus Apple in the court case. Since he was at Kotaku, he was really at the heart, kind of the tip of the spear for a lot of the Gamergate saga, if you recall that. So we talk about that in retrospect and some other light topics as well. We'd always appreciate it if you help support independent games and media by subscribing to MinnMax's YouTube channel or heading over to patreon.com/MinnMax with two N's, of course, where if you support us at that $5 tier, you unlock the podcast version of this interview, all of our other interviews, our huge community game club discussions called The Deepest Dives, where we make the best, most thorough discussion about a game on the internet. Our next one is Mass Effect 1, so please look forward to that, and a bunch of other fun stuff. So we appreciate the support. So without further ado, here's Stephen Totilo. Stephen Totilo, welcome to MinnMax, sir.
Thank you for having me, Ben.
It's an honor to have you. Hell of a week to launch a newsletter. A lot of news happening this week. And as a newsman,
Yes.
Is this just like as good as it gets or as stressful as it gets?
This is pretty good, but it's also pretty stressful to have this be the launch week, to have it be the continuation of pandemic, work from home. The kids are screaming, they need their toys when they're in the other room. And I'm trying to listen to the court trial, but I need to also help out and be a good dad. So it can be challenging.
Yeah. So Epic versus Apple. I mean, this could be an hour-long conversation.
Who you
so
got?
I won't
Who you
derail
got?
you.
Who's winning? Come on.
Am I just naive for thinking, well, Apple will win this? And I pick up fragments here and there, and it seems very much like I probably heard somebody smarter than me say this at some point, but just the idea of I don't think it really holds water why they're coming after Apple, but then leaving Microsoft and Nintendo and Sony alone with that 30% cut. What's the difference about sideloading different software in those platforms versus Apple?
Yeah, I mean, the argument that Epic is trying to make is that consoles are inherently different than phones because phones are a thing you kind of can't replace. First of all, they're a general interest device, and you're kind of stuck on that device in a way that you don't have the same freedom if you are a console gamer or a console developer to switch over from Xbox to, say, PlayStation, sell your games on a PlayStation, and you can assume that that Xbox consumer could have gotten a PlayStation without that much trouble, just a few $100, and good luck finding it in stock if you're looking for the next gen one, right? As opposed to the idea that if you're on a phone, it's a general purpose device, you've got it for reasons other than gaming. You can't easily jump from Apple to Android. At least that's their argument. I think Apple claims, it's actually easier than people think. They're really trying to make sure the judge thinks of this as these are not comparable devices, and therefore they're not allowed to play by the same rule set. Also, up to them talking about the idea of console makers saying we lose money when we sell consoles, which is itself a thing that's become part of the news this week.
Yeah. I mean, are you listening to every second of this? Are you taking notes? What is your life like in the middle of this maelstrom here?
So, Wednesdays are the toughest because Wednesdays are the days that here in New York City, the kids cannot go to school. So my kids are in pre-K, I got twins. And so yesterday was a hoot because they're running around, and it was raining too. So they're running around in the other room. Thankfully we have childcare. So Nanny was watching them. But I'm holed up in the bedroom. I'm listening on it's a call-in number. Me and only 22 other reporters were using the press line as opposed to, I think, the public line used by, I think they have a max of 200 people. I'm listening on the phone. I'm recording the phone recording on my iPad. I'm filing the newsletter on my computer. So I have all these different screens. Then I hear the kids in the background having to run out and help out with them here and there. So kind of chaotic, a little bit hard to think when you're also listening to this trial at the same time as everything else that you're doing. And I don't know how much you listened in, but the audio quality was the pits. So
I really haven't. I've just been seeing tweets and obviously the avalanche of news stories where it just seems it's just fascinating behind the scenes stuff bubbling up about the game industry that I never saw coming. There's so many weird things where it's why is this part of the discovery process? Why is this paperwork about Walmart's streaming platform necessary for this case? Just weird things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that was part of an email chain from Mark Rain, who's one of the VPs at Epic, talking about Stadia and other streaming services Actually, I can't even remember what the relevance was. It's just so exciting to get to the good stuff, Ben, that the relevance is confusing. But like we reported on, there was like an email thread from about a decade ago between Apple executives, and they're freaking out because there's a school shooting video game that has made its way onto the iPhone a couple of months after one of the many horrible school shootings that have occurred in this country. I think it was Parkland. And so it's about 2 months after that. And somebody who says they're a 14-year-old app developer writes to Tim Cook and says, I can't believe you have this game here. I'm appalled. My own app that I make, unrelated to that stuff, was rejected because I didn't have the right sign-in login. How do I get caught up in that? And then somebody making a game about a school shooting, gets through. And Tim Cook just forwards it on to other Apple people to deal with. And they're immediately saying, pull this game right away. And then they try to figure out what happened. And so there's this one guy who they're like, oh, it's Armin. He approved this developer has 2 apps. He approved them together in less than 32 seconds. So Apple has claimed we don't play the games ourselves to make sure it's some sort of standards review. But apparently even the metadata was like, do you like school shootings? And here you go kind of thing.
Jesus.
So what was this guy looking at? What is Apple's process? And so Epic says, look at this. Apple is not being very careful with their store. Why are people paying them 30% of their revenue if this is the level of scrutiny that they're putting on apps, or it's this arbitrary? They're trying to make Apple look bad. Now, how many times has Apple screwed up to that degree? How many times do they need to screw up to that degree for that to convince the judge there's a problem here with Apple's percentages? But then, if Apple's percentages are messed up, does that even constitute an antitrust violation, which is ultimately what Apple is trying to prove? I think for all of us, it's a little hard to wrap our heads around the idea that a company simply saying, you have to play by our rules in the store would inherently be a monopolistic practice. It seems frustrating. I mean, I'm frustrated that I can't play Xbox Cloud Gaming, xCloud, whatever it's called, on my iPhone. Certainly not the way that I would want to, just not having to worry about going through the browser. And that was Apple's limitation, and Microsoft testified about how upset they were about it. But I don't know if those types of behaviors are simply annoying to me as a gamer, annoying to companies, or are they antitrust violations? I don't know.
Yeah, save your money on Apple.
Probably.
Okay. I mean, some of it's so bizarre, like getting to see those emails in particular. And I'm wondering if you have that line of, oh, this is just awesome news and awesome insight of the game industry versus like, this is a little too intimate. Like seeing like Gio Corsi from Sony, like arguing, or not arguing, but just like presenting the case of like, we don't want to do crossplay at PlayStation for these reasons. Or even seeing like emails from Tim Cook, which I loved when Tim Sweeney emailed him talking about how it should be a more open platform. And Tim Cook's response is like, is this the guy from the rehearsal? Like, what is this dude?
Is this guy? I don't know her.
Yeah, exactly.
So no, I mean, I guess I'm just a scumbag reporter, right? And that I don't mind. I'm quite pleased to read these types of emails. I mean, none of it is personal information. It's not somebody talking about a family illness or something like that. They're talking about the business. This is a business that is. I mean, every reporter would probably say this on every beat that they're on. It's frustratingly secretive. So there is an extent to which all of us in journalism would like to know more. And so you have a case where more is out there, even if it's not for the reasons that the people are in court. It's just exciting and illuminating to see. What was interesting to me was that as I was going through a lot of the documents over the weekend, because there was a big dump of them, like might have been Friday or maybe Saturday that they got uploaded. It was that a lot of them, I was talking to somebody in the gaming industry, and they were like, this is like going through a time machine, because to them it was, it's all stuff from like 2019. There's very little in there that's from 2020, and even less that's in there from 2021. So a lot of what's coming out, like Microsoft's studies of the games industry, are all based on calendar year 2019. So they talk about how much money Sony is, generating on first-party games versus Nintendo. They redact themselves. You don't get to learn anything about Microsoft from these documents. It is a year and a half at best out of date. And so, like, how do you really interpret that? What does that really tell you about these companies now? But we are learning things, and I think it actually is interesting and newsworthy and relevant to know things like the crossplay issues, because it made sense that Sony was resistant to that when companies were talking about it. It's something that I can't imagine anybody who plays games would have been against conceptually for years. As long as there's been online play, why can't we just play against other people who have a copy of the game?
Yeah.
And to know, okay, this is what it took. You know, it took the success of Fortnite, the bravado or the boldness of Epic to push for this, because of course they saw it financially beneficial to themselves, to put enough pressure on Sony. Why should Sony have had to have given in? They're the market leader. You know, what were they going to gain from it? And we know what they gained from it. They gained an extra cut. The idea being, if people didn't follow the granularities here too much, that Sony said, yes, we will allow for crossplay for various games. But if people are playing on our platform, but they're also playing on another platform, and on that other platform is where they're spending money on the microtransactions, then we're going to get a cut of that. You, Epic, are going to have to give us a cut of the Fortnite revenue that people who also play on PlayStation are generating when they're instead playing and buying the in-app purchases on another platform.
Don't you think,
measuring that against playing time?
Doesn't Microsoft and Nintendo see that and be like, wait a minute, why is Sony getting this cut of the revenue? Can they go back and kind of redo their deal?
Well, I mean, so you talk about who are the interested parties in this information. I'm sure that a lot of this has been illuminating to various competitors. There was a list of the deals that Epic made with companies that issued their games for free on the Epic Game Store. And you had, I think I saw, one indie game was paid $75,000 and another was paid $750,000. You can see the downloads. And so I'm sure all these companies are kicking themselves, we should have asked for more. They got that much money. So I'm sure there's a lot of instances here. There's also a certain amount of knowledge that people in the industry do have of their competitors because businesses tend to intersect, that I can't imagine some of these things are as surprising as we might initially assume. You have Sony trying to redact the amount of copies that Minecraft has sold on PlayStation platforms. And I'm thinking, do they really think, is it plausible that Microsoft wouldn't know? And isn't that the main party that wouldn't want to know that? So I don't know. There was a Nintendo contract in this documentation, and it was, it just looked like a zebra. You couldn't read anything. It was just black bars, except this one section that basically says, if you have to swear you don't work for the Yakuza, if you do, you can't work with us, which apparently is a fairly standard clause in Japanese contracts.
Really?
But this is a contract to be a developer for the Switch. It was almost entirely redacted except for that. And
why would they leave that part out? It's who knows what is under the redactions at that point? But
who knew? And I talked about this in the newsletter that we're doing at Axios. That it was just kind of so intriguing. A couple days later, and it's been one of the weird things, is that there's files that keep appearing and disappearing in the online folder, basically a Dropbox folder that you can get stuff from, that the court keeps uploading. And every time somebody's testifying and the lawyer says, I'm submitting this into evidence, read this to me. What does this really say? Those will then just show up in the box if they are not sealed, if they're not something where the court is allowing it to be kept completely secret. So there's stuff that doesn't get on there at all. There's stuff that gets on there, it's redacted.
Gotcha.
So anyway, so files keep coming on and off all day, the last several days. And some of it's been frustrating because the Sony crossplay stuff, Tom Warren and the team over at The Verge, to their credit, they've been doing excellent work. They got those docs and then they just got pulled. And then Sony was complaining that those documents even got out there. And when they returned, I think they returned in limited fashion. So the Nintendo contract thing that I mentioned is redacted. And then I just happened to look another day and I'm scrolling to the bottom of another document. And I'm like, oh my God, there's the unredacted version of this Nintendo Switch contract. Then I read through it, and Ben, maybe my eyes have glazed over from all the trial stuff to this week, but there wasn't anything juicy.
Oh, come on, man.
I was like, oh man, come on. I wanted Mario's middle name or something. Come on.
It's bizarre and fascinating, but you mentioned it. Congratulations on Axios and the newsletter and the whole thing. How did this all come about?
Well, thank you. Me and Megan Farukmanesh are doing this gaming newsletter for those who don't know. And we just started it this week. Would that be May 3rd? Yes, May 3rd was our launch date. Same day as the trial, as you pointed out before. And this came about just from my interest after running Kotaku for 9 years and having been at that publication for 12 and quite the adventure that working at that company through all of its historic dealings were. I was interested in potentially doing something that was a little bit closer to the reporting that I'd done before at MTV News, a little bit less of having to manage up, a little bit less to having to be responsible for an entire team and really focus on journalism again, focus on the reporting. And so I started exploring my options last year. And part of what I thought about was, who doesn't cover games now, who should?
Yeah.
And to me, in my mind, most mainstream outlets don't, well, not that in my mind, most mainstream outlets don't, and they all should. I don't have to convert you or anybody else who's listening to this, that gaming is a huge deal. And it's ridiculous that there's been such limited coverage and limited commitment by the mainstream media to do so. And to some extent, even limited commitment by the owners of the gaming press to fund those outlets. So everybody's kind of doing it on the cheap. I've been doing it on the cheap or relying on the occasional freelance story or what have you. I've been a contributor to the New York Times on and off since 2004, I think. I've had basically 3 freelance stints with them, 2 of them concurrent with writing at Kotaku. Fun fact, by the way, most people don't know this, I think. There was a 2-year stretch where Kotaku reviews would appear in the New York Times.
Oh, yeah.
They devote a page of the New York Times to, here are the games coming out. And we would just boil down Kotaku reviews to a paragraph or 2 each.
That is cool.
And we put them in there. But the idea that Kotaku is in the New York Times was always one of my, something I was quite proud of. But the New York Times was just, until very recently, just not interested in or not able to hire a full-time games reporter. And they certainly have full-time reporters on lots of other entertainment beats. Kellen Browning, who's been with them for about a year, just went on to full-time capacity with them, and he reports to the tech team there. And he seems up to the task, and I'm excited to see what he does, and I'm glad to see the New York Times doing stuff. But anyway, I reached out to Axios. And
so it's literally just looking down a list of who doesn't have gaming coverage. Axios. I like the Jonathan Swan interviews. Maybe there's something there.
It was asking people for thoughts of who do you think would be into it? Because it's who am I? In one regard, I'm the editor-in-chief at the time of one of the largest gaming sites in the world, and I'm pretty proud of the run that I've had at that point. But if you're a big publication and you don't cover games yet, do you know? Do you care? You've certainly not been moved by all sorts of other important things that happen in gaming that are far more important than my run at Kotaku. In Axios' case, it's essentially, they operate with very much a startup vibe. They've only been around for about 4 years. And I think are really just hungry and looking to expand and explore. And so honestly, there were not people who were initially on my list, just because it didn't occur to me that they would want to do it, and then made a connection. That connection led to another connection.
Yeah.
And suddenly I was having, pitch calls with the editor-in-chief, Nick Johnston, and we went from there. I wrote some sample newsletters. They liked them, and eventually we were able to do a newsletter. And it was a question of were we going to do it weekly or do it daily. And it's if you want to do daily and you want it to be good, we can't just do it with one person.
Yeah.
So Megan, who is brilliant, happily was willing to, and interested in sort of changing her position from being an excellent reporter at The Verge to co-authoring this newsletter with me. So, we're pretty excited. I think it's going to morph a lot over the time that we do this. To be clear, we're not just doing the newsletter. Axios.com has articles on it, just like you'd see articles about any topic anywhere else. And so we're filing there, but we have this this daily email newsletter that we hopefully will be delivering somewhere between noon and 1 p.m. Eastern every weekday. We've been a little bit later than that in week 1, but we're going to get that.
It's fine.
We're going to tighten that up.
Yeah. So I'm a subscriber, and I'm not a big newsletter guy. And so the first one I got started out with why gaming matters. And I was like, yep,
yes.
This looks like, major publication getting into the gaming space. Okay.
Yeah.
But then it really snuck up on me, even things in that first issue and then moving on the next couple of days, oh, this is a really interesting angle. I mean, I learned about, the Witcher 3's director leaving CD Projekt Red from that, where it's oh, I missed that headline. That's great. And then in today's, there was a story about just the influence of the Wii U and how critical it is, strangely enough, to the Switch's success. And it's oh, these are really good tidbits. It's another filter, another way to catch some gaming news that you might not think about or might miss.
I appreciate you liking it. Yeah, every newsletter starts with a word count and the number of minutes that we say it'll take you to read it. I don't know if you've checked to see if it's true or inaccurate.
I haven't done the millisecond.
250 words can be read in a minute, especially in the style. If people don't know, Axios style includes a lot of bullet points, things that I'll read like an outline. And we are aiming to be about a 4 to 7 minute read every day. If we're even at 8 minutes, I'll probably get in trouble. That would be a 2,000 word newsletter, and they don't want that. So we hopefully won't take up too much of people's time. I am sure that to some readers, you'll say, oh, I saw this already on another publication. Great. There's other great journalists out there, and part we can't be expected, I think, to beat everybody to everything. And in some cases, we want to highlight other people's terrific work. And yet, I think that we can find angles that other people may not have seen in some cases because we're not having to cover it right as it happens, at least not for the newsletter. And also, there's just been things I've been really hungry to report on and things that I've really wanted to do. And it's super empowering to have a really talented team as I worked with at Kotaku. And they can do so much. And that's always was one of the greatest thrills of my run at Kotaku, was just seeing other people succeed and having so much pride in their work and knowing that we were able to collectively, I think, improve journalism about video games. But you can't do a lot of your own work. And, I wouldn't want to foist my ideas upon Kotaku staff, at least not often. I mean, sometimes people were interested in an idea I had, but I mostly wanted them to deliver on their own ideas. So this is a chance for me and Megan to deliver on our ideas. And that's pretty exciting for us to do. And also, it's forcing me to rethink things. I spent a couple months prepping for newsletter launch, talking to dozens of people in the games industry, did a lot of off-the-record calls, background conversations, or what have you, just to get a sense of what people thought mattered, what people were excited about, worried about, where they thought gaming was going. And that was very helpful, kind of recalibrate some of my thoughts. And hopefully that'll also manifest itself as we do this newsletter. Yeah,
it's an interesting trend, I think, kind of the rise of newsletters here. And in a lot of other aspects, it just seems like media in general, and especially with the games media, it's just things are taking a big turn for the leaner and for the more efficient. A lot of people are realizing, like, you don't need this big ecosystem and infrastructure to crank out the content that people actually want to consume. And so is that part of what your transition was, of just, it's great to run Kotaku, but I can be so much more efficient and maybe we can focus back to the basics here?
Well, I won't pretend I didn't talk to Substack, but I did, and I just wasn't interested. I mean, they weren't offering me one of these $250,000 advances or deals or whatever. So, but there is that model, right, where you go solo and you don't work with other people, and you just basically trading off of your name and your reporting skills. And some people are doing that in a way that I think is valuable because they're getting their beat and their work that maybe corporate media wouldn't support seen. In other cases, it just seems like an ego venture and a quick cash in. For me, it wasn't so much that I wanted to be away from the other media apparatus. After all, I've joined a successful and thriving media company that's got a newsroom of more than 100 people, and we have a show on HBO, for God's sake. So we're not like just some scrappy people. But I personally, I turned 40 quite some time ago, and I've got kids, and I've been covering games for nearly 2 decades, and so for me it was, and as I've alluded to before, I mean, running Kotaku was quite an adventure, and I thought maybe it's time for a different adventure. I wouldn't want to do something necessarily easier, but maybe something that's more dealing with a little bit less of aggravation from within and above, and more that would just sort of be the challenges of just doing a new thing. In terms of needing a lot of infrastructure, editors I think are essential. They help you. Have colleagues are essential. And I was really happy that we were able to do a daily newsletter, and then I could work with Megan, again, somebody whose work I think the world of, and who just personally I think the world of, because I like also having a trusted person to bounce ideas off of. And we have editors at Axios as well. So, I think that there's a lot of ways to do this stuff. I think people can do great things regardless of what platform they're on. It certainly is the quality of the work, and that there's advantages and disadvantages to every approach.
Yeah, I think I'm just thinking about it more this week with the news of Giant Bomb basically having some sort of a reboot, a big transition over there, and it just kind of, I think Jeff Gerstmann even brought this up on the last episode of the Bombcast, the latest episode of the Bombcast, where he talked about, what's the point of a site anymore for video games in 2021? And I'm just trying to get a sense of if you've thought about that as well. Just like, what is the best format here? Or what legacy things can we just get rid of?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm ready to ditch gaming sites, because look, we're asking people to read something in their email inbox, and I know there's friction to that. I know there's people who just email, I don't want to read my emails, or people are already telling me they're falling behind. They're like, oh God, you released a 4th one this week already. I'm like, wow, you think it was hard for you to read them? It was hard for us to write them, but we're going to get there. There's again pros and cons to everything. I think that gaming sites certainly have their place, but gaming sites really need the support. And the journey that Kotaku is on is one where, I left 2 months ago. They still officially don't have a new editor in chief. I really question that approach that management team has taken. And, I got along quite well with the editorial director there above me, but, he doesn't call the shots at the end of the day. He is not the owner of the company. And to let that brilliantly talented team go without official leadership. I mean, there's people there who have stepped up big time, from what I understand and the conversations I've had with them. And I hope people really do still, keep checking out the site. And there's a lot of talk about it. People whose names I know left. There's still great people at Kotaku, everybody, and it's still well worth your time. And looking at all the sites even more these days than I used to, I see so many stories on Kotaku that I don't see anywhere else. I see angles that I don't see anywhere else. So I think still so highly of that team. But I worry for Kotaku in the sense that I worry that what happens to a site when it's experiencing, the various blows that it's taken, and when again, we all can see 2 months after I'm gone, still no new EIC. I find that really troubling, and I really hope that whether it's Jeff Gerstmann, still there at Giant Bomb, or it's the team at IGN, and I see some expansion there, or Fanbyte. I find that really exciting, seeing all the really talented people who are joining Fanbyte. I think there's still a lot of life and potential in gaming websites. It's really a matter of is the talent there, the reporting talent, the critical talent being supported, and we're going to see, I think, outlets rise and fall still based on that.
Yeah. Here's an impossibly big question. Looking back at your run at Kotaku, what do you think are some of the big lessons you learned just about team leadership? How to motivate the team, the best way to handle a team, how hands-on, hands-off you should be.
Yeah. I mean, I was there for a long time, so it almost feels like it happens in phases for me, right? I joined in 2009 as deputy editor. Brian Crescente hired me, and we were a very different company than even in 2012 when I became editor-in-chief. I would say first and foremost, it's care about the people that work for you and to really put their well-being and their success as your priority. You cannot measure success by your own, whatever might be your personal accomplishments, your own article, your own scoop, your own review, your own whatever. It's needing to achieve as a leader a selflessness and a pride in the achievement of the people that work with you and for you. It's essential to pay attention to and listen to those folks. And so I feel like in my most successful moments, I was listening and engaged with what it is that a person on the team wanted to report or write, and I was finding ways to support them. And I think in the moments where I most second guessed it and feel like I fell short, it's recognizing a person's frustration and looking back and saying, I missed these signals, or I failed to engage with them enough to really figure out a solution to whatever it is. And you will have, in any team, you will have tensions and you will have frustrations. And you don't want to get complacent with that. You don't want to say, well, this is just how this team's chemistry is, or this is how these folks operate, or this is how this person's achieved their success before, and so it doesn't need to change. It's, I think being open to changing, improving, listening, and yes, standing by your people both privately and publicly. I mean, one of my regrets during the whole Gamergate saga was that I don't feel like I sufficiently publicly pushed back on the extent to which the attacks on our staff were happening in bad faith. Very obvious bad faith. I was very much I'm a journalism purist. I found it ironic, painfully ironic, that of all the editors-in-chief that were being attacked, not to say that other editors-in-chief were doing bad journalism, running bad shops. People have been running good shops. But to come after me, to say that I don't care about journalism ethics was ridiculous. And yet I thought the way to defang sort of what were the best technicalities that people were coming after us for, coming after great reporters because they noticed something in their Twitter history, 5 years prior that doesn't comport with a journalism handbook.
Yeah, it's funny.
My approach was too much about my approach was too much about. Pardon me. It was too much about saying, "Oh, that's not exactly how it happened," or "Okay, you're right, but that's not what we do anymore," and not saying like, "Why are you even coming after us about this? It's so obvious what you're really all about here."
Yeah.
And I wish I'd done more of that, because I think that would have meant more to a team. We were able to keep together as a team, and in fact, even there were people who joined us because of how, at least compared to other outlets, we covered Gamergate more And they said, I want to work for you. You're closer to telling the truth. But I look back on some of the, I just felt such a great responsibility to that team. And I saw some of the scars that lingered long term. So I've thought a lot over the years about, what if I said this differently? What if I did this differently? The mental health of your teams, especially if you're in media, is really such an important thing and such an overlooked thing. There's very few media outlets that have figured out the right approaches and strategies to helping writers, especially marginalized writers, really anybody who's an cishet white man, deal with the sadly inevitable harassment and abuse that comes from just being a person online who writes. Sorry, I'm in Brooklyn, and you may hear the great sounds of outside here and there.
It's beautiful. The city's alive again. No, I think it's interesting to think about, how exactly that would have looked. I mean, you just would have done more interviews and said, F you just want to attack women. Like, I'm not even going to dignify that with a response. Is that the best avenue?
So there was a reporter at, I think it was PC Gamer, who called out the use of the PC Master Race kind of line, right?
Yeah.
And this is a reporter who, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the person's name, but they did good work, and they were not in the crosshairs of Gamergate people. They were not in the dossiers of people who needed to be attacked. It was my staff who were the main people that people thought, in terms of journalists that needed to be attacked. I mean, obviously, women in game development were attacked quite a bit as well, and that was, awful and brutal to see, and we reported on that. But my staff, in terms of reporters, we were the outlet, we were the staff who were being attacked, and it was very obvious why. People assumed a certain political leaning, didn't like the arguments that were presented in a lot of our coverage. And I think just we're very uncomfortable with some of the very confident expression of some of the women and others on our staff who were writing about diversity and writing about things that I think are real human issues and writing about them in really real ways. Anyway, there's this reporter at a PC publication, PC Gamer, and they call out this master race thing, and suddenly they're in Gamergate's crosshairs. Suddenly, people go through that person's social media history and discover that they were dating a person who worked at Ubisoft. Suddenly, they're able to connect the dots and say, oh, this person wrote about Ubisoft, or their publication wrote about Ubisoft, and they didn't have this disclosure. And I thought, how convenient. Only when this reporter calls out this, I think, kind of ethically dubious moniker that this basically, sort of Nazi-ish joke, of, eugenics joke of master race, that you decide, oh, this proves that this guy is an SJW or whatever. And so then you decide to go find out if he's got any journalistic skeletons in his closet. It was the sequencing of that. It was the very obvious way that the journalistic ethical infraction was weaponized and only was noticed even because there was another agenda at play. We don't like the politics that are within this person's argument. And I think exposing that, even as I say this, of course, I remember that one of the things that I sort of worried about, and this is even manifest in various ways to this day, is the extent to which if I say something about another person to defend them, then how much abuse does that person get because I'm defending them? Mm-hmm. And so what is ultimately the net gain for that person? Is it better for me to say something, or is it better for me to say nothing? Is it better for them for me to say something or for me to say nothing? And then obviously talking to the person is the best way to figure that out. Do you want me to say something? Would you rather I don't? But even then, you're then asking that person to decide. You're asking that person to basically almost feel a responsibility if they then get abused. Well, I said it was okay, so it's a real difficult pathway to go down, I think, in terms of figuring out what is the best way to support, what is the best way to, empower and embolden staff. And also I gotta say, it was disappointing as the EIC of Kotaku to hear so much silence. There were some other media outlets that wrote about it. But I sensed that there was some schadenfreude amongst, if not in the media, amongst the games industry, for the struggles and the heat we were taking on. I don't expect publishers to be our friends, developers to be our friends. But I'll say this, in contrast, it's been heartening to see in recent years the rallying of support that occurs amongst the media when one of the media is being attacked. Yeah. It has been heartening to even sometimes, hear from people who tell, even if it's my own staff or my former staff, telling me about personal messages they got of support, and knowing that that's, I think, been more of a thing. But I felt in 2014 that a lot of people were like, serves them right or let them squirm when it came to the experience that Kotaku was having. Our staff, kicked a lot of ass throughout that. We had some of the best stories we've ever published during that time. I also never quite as svelte as I was during Gamergate. I lost a lot of weight. So Gamergate as weight loss program. Look in the mirror sometimes, Ben, and I think like could have had like my cheekbones be a little more defined right now.
You're welcome to say something controversial and get all those idiots rally to back up against you. You want if it'll help you lose weight. I don't know exactly how it works, but
yeah, no, I came down with salmonella the same week that the Gamergate stuff began, so it might also have just been the bad eggs, but something. The bad real eggs or the bad Twitter eggs, one of the two led to extraordinary weight loss, which I joke because I never would want anybody to experience that again. I mean, if I had to experience it again, fine, whatever. I was not attacked directly much, certainly not to the extent to which that I would consider myself a victim of Gamergate. It was just very frustrating, that situation. And as I'm sure you could tell, I think a lot about that. And I think about ways where as a leader, did I do enough? And I don't know that it would be possible for me to ever feel like I did enough. So I'll say I didn't. And that I wish that I'd known better how to support my staff as much as I was trying.
Yeah, it's amazing how raw it still is. What, 7 years later?
Yeah. It'll be 7 in August.
Yeah.
If you count that as the start of Gamergate. I mean, I think that's also important for everybody to think about and acknowledge, is that in some ways that's an arbitrary starting point for the harassment, the streams of harassment that a lot of people have experienced. I mean, there were certainly people attacking our journalists for dubious reasons prior to Gamergate, and since, if you consider the Gamergate as having sort of start and end points at any point. It's just essentially a shittiness to the way that some people sort of handle dealing with people, or really dehumanizing people online. I tried a lot of listening even to Gamergate people, to some people's frustration, to try to understand where they were coming from. I found some of those conversations just intensely frustrating. Yeah,
I definitely know the feeling. I'm wondering just about, obviously you mentioned talking about diversity in the game industry and stuff like that. I'm wondering other big trends throughout the field of game news over the last 10 years or so that have really stood out to you, that have really fascinated you, that have risen up or kind of taken a different shape than you expected.
Well, I mean, the ups and downs of obviously various companies and developers has always been fascinating, right? To see who's when does the hubristic moment strike any of the big platform holders that we see another turnabout the way that we saw, the stumble of a PS3 or the debacle of a Wii U, and then you look at the things that follow that, and I've always enjoyed covering the people who are kind of losing. Because they tend to be scrappier and more experimental. Yeah. And, I've said this to people. I'm like, no offense, but I'm kind of glad you're not in first place right now, because you're so much more interesting because of that for anybody in the competition. I mean, look at all the things that Microsoft has done, right, in the last several years, out of a sense of trying to outmaneuver, an implacable Sony in terms of their dominance in console gaming.
Or even Epic investing in Fortnite in those early days, where it's kind of a dark period when they were building that thing up.
Yeah, investing in Fortnite or playing a lot of PUBG and noticing what was good about that.
Well, sure.
Which doesn't discount it, right? I mean, not plenty of successful games have been influenced, shall we say, by others. I really think just anything and everything that has involved the humanizing of gaming, the understanding of the culture and of the people. Jason Schreier is a terrific reporter. I know he's on your show. Yeah. I think quite highly of his work. But no offense to Jason, but I do not think he was the best reporter in Kotaku's history. I think it's Patricia Hernandez. Because Patricia Hernandez, even now at Polygon, I shouldn't say even, continuing now at Polygon, had just the most brilliant sense for story, always about what people were doing in gaming. To me, she revolutionized games journalism by caring about what the players were doing in a way that nobody had before, in celebrating the culture of what people do when they play games. They and other people who worked at Kotaku, I think, were brilliant reporters. But I wanted to just, when I think about where gaming has gone, I can't help but think of Patricia's work in terms of just making people care about, the community of Pokemon players who are finding interesting ways to speedrun Fallout New Vegas without dying, or to hunt down shiny Pokemon, or, a lot of things I think now even see as commonplace in games coverage. Speedrunning coverage has picked up a lot in the last several years. But it's what people are doing. When I was at MTV News for 4 years before Kotaku, I had this idea. People are into lists, right? People have always been into lists. And I had this idea of, could you make a list of the 10 most influential gamers of all time? And the hypothesis was that if gaming is interactive, then inherently the audience is more meaningful to the work and to the legacy of the medium than the audience of movies, books, whatever else is. You can immediately come up with examples for me, I'm sure, of times where the readers and viewers and listeners of other forms of entertainment influence the direction of that medium. But my theory was that people played games that more so than others. And so I went about and tried to come up with this list, and I don't know how good MTV's archives are for my work from 2007 or 8 or whatever, but I was able to put together a list, and it involved modders and esports players and other people. I continued on, and I created a sometimes mocked award at Kotaku once I became EIC, the Gamers of the Year. And especially that was fraught once the word gamer became much more controversial. But I always wanted to make sure that we were highlighting people who played, because I thought that understanding that part of the feedback loop and the humanity there of gamers and of just the interactions of people playing with people making games, even if those are indirect interactions, was essential. And so these days, I'm quite happy when people seem to care more about what players are doing, when they want to know what's happening with the people. You go back to Jason and his reporting and others reporting on labor conditions. That works if you give a damn about the people, if you recognize that there's human beings there. So all the coverage that has worked toward that end, and everything about gaming that has empowered creators to be able to speak up for themselves, I think has been to a benefit to the medium and to the culture. I try to avoid, people always often refer to it as the games industry. I think even as we were working on promo copy for Axios Gaming's newsletter and coverage, there's lots of usage of the games industry, or mentions of like the billions of dollars gaming raises. I think to a fault, people focus on gaming as a means of commerce. They focus to a fault on just who's making money, who's not. This is a business. It's essential to think of it as a culture as well. It's essential to think of it as, go to the Roger Ebert, is it an art form? Of course it's art. But to think of the humanity, and to try to understand that, because there's a lot of experiences that we have as we play games that we still don't talk to anybody about. Because games are this thing, even if we're playing multiplayer games, where, certainly with single player games, where we kind of go into a zone and we have an experience, and we don't have an easy opportunity to kind of discuss it collectively. At Kotaku, we had sister publications. So there was Deadspin, sports outlet, and Gizmodo, tech outlet, and Jezebel, an outlet for women. Although anybody could read it, it was brilliant. Gawker, et cetera and so forth. Fleshbot was a porn site for a while. There were sister sites with all these stacks of DVDs next to me, Ben. When I was first there, it was a very, very interesting scene.
Classy.
But some people who visited for gaming meetings were quite happy with the stacks. Like, can I take some? I'm like, okay, whatever you got to do. I guess not mine, but you can ask the editor there. But it was always like important to think about which stories that we did at Kotaku would be relevant to the readerships of those other sites. So it was thinking about that in a broader way. But it also, I would talk to the staffs of those sites, and I say to the editors at Deadspin, I was like, man, I envy you, because you only really have to know like 5 or 6 sports, how they work.
Right.
From everybody watches the same games every night. Super Bowl happens, everybody's seeing the same 4, however many hours the Super Bowl is. More than 4, right? And we don't have that. We have a new sport every week, multiple ones, right? Everybody's playing them, experiences them at different times. You look at GTA 5, right? GTA 5, been this dominant game, successful game for a decade or whatever, practically a decade. 100 million plus people have played it. And yet, how many of us experienced the same scenes at the same time, like on a Sunday night, such that was the water cooler conversation or the Twitter discussion the next day? The gaming resists this common cultural touchstones There's common moments of discussion. And that in a way holds back, I think, the ability for all of us who care about this culture to even develop the best language and grammar for discussing it. And in some ways it resists gaming from fully being as, I think, in the mainstream. And people might think that's absurd because I've had people say to me, well, people who never touch a controller, they're dying off, right? So gaming is so much more mainstream. And playing games is like playing a musical instrument. You have to have the dexterity and the desire, right, to wield the thing, right? It's not a flute, it's not a guitar, it's a controller. And we may think, oh, that's easy, right? But we've all handed a dual stick controller to somebody's hands who's never played before, and they can't walk forward and look straight ahead at the same time in the game, right? And it's a thing where they're just looking at the ground. I don't know where I'm going. And then you're sitting next to them. You're so frustrated. You're like, come on, this is not that hard. But it's not just knowing how to wield a controller. It's knowing that how to play a game. It's understanding its systems. It's how to do well in it. You take Fortnite is ubiquitous, right? And yet if anybody who never played it before goes and plays a match, they don't have a chance of winning it, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this always going to be this barrier, I think, because playing games is, again, more the equivalent of playing music than it is listening to music. And if music, history tells us anything, far more people are interested in listening to music than they are in playing it. And I'm sure, and I'm not a musician, I'm sure that those who play music will tell you that it is a whole other level of experience than listening. I'm sure many would say it's superior. So all of us who play games, like, we're those musicians. And yet I get why so many people like watching gameplay on Twitch, because to me, those are the people who are consuming games the way that I consume music. That to me is the mass way of appreciating or receiving most art forms. And that's just logistically the most feasible way for most people to do so. And as long as playing games requires you to essentially learn an instrument and practice that instrument, well, how many of y'all out there are learning a new instrument every week?
Yeah.
How many of y'all are you keeping up with your piano lessons? You do in playing games, but it's not actually weird to think that there will be people our age, whatever age you are, listening to this, watching this, that will just choose, I've got something else to do in my life, or I don't have time to play the piano, whatever the proverbial piano is, and also play the proverbial guitar, and also play the proverbial, ocarina, right? You can't.
Right, for sure. Before I let you go, here's a weird one for you. Kyle Hilliard and I used to be obsessed with this hypothetical, which is, what is the most clickable headline you could write on a gaming site right now? Doesn't have to be true, but scientifically, what is the headline you could type out that would get the most amount of clicks?
I have a really macabre answer.
Okay, go for it.
I mean, the example I always found myself giving people, and this is quite grim, but like if I wanted to explain to people like the process, like, okay, this is how we're going to do things at Kotaku, but if there's breaking news, this is what we have to do, I would always say, if Miyamoto dies.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And then it became closer to reality because people experienced Satoru Iwata's death, right? And the reaction, and I don't think that he has the exact same connection to the gaming community as as Shigeru Miyamoto. And frankly, I'm speaking of people that, for better or worse, most people have never heard of. So you could argue that like that's not the most clickable headline, but to people probably watching this show, that would be the most clickable headline. You obviously would never do that. If you wanted like a funnier answer, like,
or you can go darker, really. Either is fine.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably some naked mod has been discovered, nude mode in pick a game.
Pikmin 2?
To have a nude mode in. Olimar. Yeah, Olimar and Olimar nude.
That's actually a good one. Yeah, the secret nude mod revealed was in Pikmin 2 the entire time. That's a good clickable headline. Like, Miyamoto's death, yeah, that's going to be a biggie. I mean, is it more clickable than Nintendo's Miyamoto reveals existence of alien life? Or people would just think that's like a cutesy headline for a trailer.
Yeah, they just think, oh, that's Miyamoto being Miyamoto. He's moved on from, whatever gardening and whatever his other muses were. I mean, look, company X buys a Nintendo. And of course, if you want to say most clickable, like you pick a company that could buy Nintendo. So you would say like,
Cub
Gearbox
Foods
buys Nintendo.
Yes. The number one most clickable headline, according to the News Maestro, is Gearbox buys Nintendo.
Randy Pitchford calling the shots. He's heading over right now to Retro Studios, not a far drive away.
There we go.
Find out what's going on with Metroid Prime 4.
There's a path. You got it. Hey, if people want to follow the newsletter, check it out every day, what should they do?
They should go to my Twitter feed and they should find the link in my bio for the sign up. So I'm just at Steven Totilo, or you can go to Axios.com and look for the sign up page and you will find a gaming newsletter, or maybe you'll find some other newsletters to sign up to as well. But, whatever your pleasure, but we hope that you'll come along for the ride, and we hope you like reading email. We won't take up too much of your time.
Cool. Well, hey, thanks so much, and hats off to you for the whole new initiative, and yeah, congratulations to you and Megan.
Thanks so much.
Cool. Thanks so much for watching or listening to this interview from MinnMax. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out the other interviews we've done as well. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye. If you are sick of snark, clickbait, and an avalanche of movie news, you can help support independent games media by subscribing to MinnMax's YouTube channel here or checking out the benefits over on Patreon. It's a nice, clean handshake. You support us, and we won't make dumb, condescending stuff for you. Your support helps us continue our mission of focusing on games, friends, and getting better. Patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. We'd appreciate it.